passage of time, we depended mostly on our watches and internal clocks. But adrenaline, fear, and the admittedly unpleasant aroma of Bronson's corpse beginning to rot made it hard. We employed every trick in the book to alleviate our boredom. Slept, played cards, tried mind games, discussed our past and plans for the future, taught one another knife tricks, and exchanged advice about working in the field. My wounds closed nicely, the flesh beginning to bind into neat lines. There would always be scars, but Larson said there were no signs of infection. But in the end, no one could ignore the edge of anxiety creeping into the lab, weaving its way into every conversation, game, and thought we attempted to distract ourselves with. We were trapped somewhere cold, dangerous, and remote. Creatures stronger than us prowled the darkness, waiting us out. The days ticked by on my watch, slow as molasses and far too quickly at the same time. Our rations dwindled and thinned. We lost valuable weight, and Keyes finally called it in the morning of the 4th day.
We haven't heard anything. I'm not going to draw this out with some grandiose speech. This is survival, and those things out there can go to hell. We need food and water.
She pointed at Larson and me to come with her. Sheaf, Connors, and Sykes would stay back to watch over Bronson's body, and also to ensure none of the creatures snuck in for another ambush. No one argued. This time I armed myself with my pistol and knife, and left the rifles to Larson and Keyes. I figured they'd serve me better in close quarters, given how fast those bastards are. We took a moment to gear up, then, after giving the others a brief nod, we slid back out into the sprawling tunnels of the Tantalus site. I kept my ears pricked and my pistol in front of me. Keyes and Larson took point and rear. I came up the middle. Crusted blood and dried entrails crunched softly underfoot as we entered the murky gloom of a devastated center. I tried not to look at the blood staining the window of the comm station. Keyes led the way to the canteen, which sat 30 feet from the tunnel entrance. She ducked into a long tent lined with low wooden benches. A metal table near the front marked where food would be served, and she immediately swept around it towards the kitchen in the back. Within the confines of the tent, Keyes risked a little light to illuminate the tiny area.
Jackpot,
she whispered as her beam fell upon shelf after shelf of non-perishable goods, cans, dried meats, sacks of sugar and flour, powdered milk. She grinned at us.
We'll fill our packs with as much as we can carry, then hightail it back. Got it?
We all nodded. Keyes was reaching up to grab a can when she looked over my shoulder and went pale.
Down.
The word was a rushed whisper as she grabbed me and Larson and yanked us to the ground. We all went prone in the shadows of the serving tables. The scent was putrid. Rotting meat invaded my nostril, and all the hairs stiffened along my neck. One of the humanoids appeared at the entrance to the canteen. Its withered body glistened wetly in the dim light. The thing was swiveling its head from side to side, teeth chattering as it searched. Flecks of mucus bubbled from the pits around its nose as it tested the air. I realized then that these things were blind. What tactical advantages that afforded them at the moment, I didn't know. I could only focus on the way the thing crawled and swayed around like a giant spider, sensing its surrounding and clutching the table beneath it with impossibly long fingers. It remained crouched where it was for a moment. My gaze drifted down to Larson, who stared back at me, full of dread. He held my gaze for a long moment, then looked down at something beneath us. I looked down, and my heart skipped. One of the cans we'd stuffed in our packs teetered precariously, threatening to drop onto the ground. I slowly reached down, moving as carefully as I could manage. The can tumbled, and the creature leapt from the table to the ground mere feet from us. Its feet dug into the stone floor. Gooey, tar-like saliva dripped from its mouth and landed inches from Larson's face. He flinched, and the can tumbled onto the floor with a clang. The creature squealed with rage and lunged at him. I raised my pistol and fired. My bullet caught it square in the jaw, splintering its teeth like rotted planks. The second came a moment later and struck it in the neck, where a fountain of thick blood oozed out. But the creature still managed to land a powerful swipe that dug deep into Larson's shoulder and sliced down to his spine. The man screamed while Keyes scrambled to her feet and fired more shots at the creature until it went down in a jerking heap. Larson bucked and gargled blood, but we had no time to help him as 3 more humanoids crashed their way through the roof of the canteen tent and launched themselves at us. One went for Keys, two at me and Larson. Just my luck. I fired indiscriminately at the closest one, cutting through its slimy organs. One shattered its shoulder blade and it spun off balance, but it still landed a brutal swipe to my side. Fortunately, it only caught me with its forearm rather than its claws, or else my guts would have been splashing over a still bucking Larson. The other creature came at me full force and rammed its spindly shoulder square into my sternum, launching me across the kitchen and into the wall of food. I groaned and slid to the floor as cans rained down around me. Keys screamed bloody murder as she tore at her attacker with her knife. She raked her blade over its skull, throat, and back like a deranged leopard, opening up deep, seeping gashes everywhere. I almost felt sorry for the creature until I saw it hiss and sink its claws into her shoulder, puncturing her upper arm. She screamed and stuck her knife into its ear all the way up to the hilt. The humanoid released her just in time for me to refocus on the one who'd rammed me into the pantry. It approached slowly and sniffed around. I realized the clanging of the cans had obscured my specific whereabouts. It took another step forward and found Larson. In a flash, it had its claws in his back, peeling his uniform and flesh away to reveal the stark nakedness of his muscles and ribs. Larson screamed again, and the creature bared its teeth, giving me time to grab a can and hurl it with as much force as I could muster. Metal and bone rang through the tent. A large gouge opened in the creature's face, its nose and teeth pulping into a mash of slimy tissue. The creature wailed and stumbled back, clutching its face. I rose and hurled another can at it, then another and another. Each one punched into its emaciated body like meteors stabbing into a new planet. They tore craters in its guts, face, and chest. I took one final bloodied can and brought it crashing down on the thing's head, parting its brain with a sickening squelch. The thing flopped on the ground and lay silent. Wheeling around, I caught a glimpse of the one Keys had stabbed in the ear, making swipes at her. She grabbed its ear and the hilt of her knife and rammed her knee into the point of its chin. Its face exploded like a rotting pumpkin. We stared, panting at each other, caught in the overwhelming fervor of the brief but bloody battle. A dark shape moved in the corner of my eye. I whirled around to see the one I'd shot lunging toward me, injured but still very much alive. Larson's knife punched into its neck in a perfectly timed throw. He swooned from his position on his knees. The creature collapsed wailing on the ground where it thrashed until Key's boots found its head. As she ensured the others were all well and truly dead, I knelt over Larson to look at his wounds. It was painfully evident he wouldn't be making it, but he didn't need to know. Instead, I simply held him and muttered thank you for everything he'd done until he drifted away. Eventually, Keys put her hand on my shoulder and began to say something, but a scream ripped through the cavern from the direction of the lab. A heartbeat later, we were sprinting down the hall. We heard footsteps coming toward us from the direction of the creature's lair and raised our guns, but it was only Connor's. He looked wild. Part of his scalp hung bleeding against the side of his face, and his fatigues were stained in blood and slime. I was relieved that he wasn't seriously injured, but the expression on his face stopped me cold.
Sykes! They dragged Sykes into that hole!
Shit! Where's Sheaf?
Keys demanded, trying to get things in order as best she could. The question might have seemed callous, but it was the only way we could figure things out without wasting time. Connors managed to grow even paler.
I don't know, man. He's in a bad way.
Without another word, he led us to the lab where Sheaf sat on one of the tables. At first, I thought he was dead. His barrel-shaped chest had been bisected diagonally by a creature, and his guts spilled out into his lap. A giant purpling bruise colored his flesh around his temple, and his body was lacerated with deep, agonizing cuts. Around his feet lay the pulverized remains of at least 3 more creatures. Then he sucked a breath in through his nose and lifted his head towards us. I could see his lungs expand and contract through his ragged fatigues.
Keys.
His voice was nothing more than a whisper. Keys knelt beside him. She didn't bother with bandages or reassurances. He was gone, and she saved his last moments for his final words. As he passed her his personal things, Connors told me what had happened in brief, shaky breaths. A couple of minutes after we were ambushed out in the canteen, someone started pounding on the lab door. There were cries to be let in, and Sykes thought it had to be one of us since the creatures couldn't talk. But when she opened the door, she found Ketterman.
He was this thing, man. Naked like the others, but not as rotten. His face was peeled off and he was laughing. Things were wriggling in his skin. He had this awful smirk when Sykes opened the door and smacked her aside. Another one of those things knocked the shit out of me, and I was out for like a minute. When I woke back up, 3 of these things were dead. Sykes wrestling with the other one, and Sheaf was fighting with that Ketterman thing.
He shook his head.
And Ketterman swiped his hand across Sheaf's chest and opened him up from hip to shoulder like it was nothing. He grabbed Sykes by the hair and dragged her out of here. I tried to run after them, but one of them tackled me and gave him enough time to take her back in that place.
Connors was close to hyperventilating at this point. I pulled him into a bear hug. Larson's gone too.
Shit.
Yeah. We let go of each other just as Sheaf released a sigh. He tilted to one side and slumped across the bench. Keyes added his possessions to Larson's. Her jaw was set in a hard line, and the muscles along her neck flexed with fury. Lifting Sheaf's rifle in her hands, she looked back at us.
I'm going after Sykes.
We both nodded without hesitation. We didn't know if rescue would come or not, just that we might be able to rescue our friend and grind Ketterman into a bloody pulp. That was enough. When we arrived at the hole at the end of the tunnel, I no longer found it terrifying. The rusted bars went inward like jagged teeth, exhaling a rotting stench that I didn't even register anymore. Flicking on our flashlights and headlamps, Keyes stepped into the darkness first, then Connors, then me. Darkness consumed us as we slid into the den of monsters. We stepped into the nest that was like stepping into the throat of a giant, dormant monster. The air was hot with meat-tainted breath. I turned my light through the engulfing gloom of the cavern. I couldn't see anything move, but skittering sounds echoed off the walls. We kept ourselves lightly packed near the center of the cave. Behind us, the grate glowed like a doorway to another dimension. It shrank with each step we took.
Sykes?
Connors whispered over the metal of his rifle. Keyes nudged him and shook her head. I understood what she was thinking. We needed to find her silently. Moving as one, we crept toward the rear of the cavern, easily the size as the one at the front of the facility. My light revealed strange structures tucked against the walls. We drew closer, and my throat filled with bile. They were small lean-tos, simple structures normally made from stretched canvases and wood supports, but these huts had been bound with bone gut for the supports and flayed human skin for the canvas. All different shapes, crusted with blood, sliced and broken in some places. I was almost grateful when I heard Sykes moan from somewhere deeper in the cavern. Beside me, I could feel Connors tensing, ready to run to her, but I caught him this time. Ketterman. I mouthed silently. We already knew he could vocalize human sounds. What was stopping him from mimicking Sykes, groaning to bait us into a trap?
Forward. Together.
Keyes whispered. It was a good plan. We covered our angles well, and our lights gave us at least 20 feet of visibility. Then Ketterman started taunting us.
You let me take her, Connors.
He sang. Well, sang wasn't exactly the right word. It was more of a hiss punctuated by wet giggles, like someone fighting for air.
She begged and screamed. Maybe I should just slice her open now.
Sykes gave a choking gasp of pain. I gripped Connor's arm iron tight. We couldn't lose him right now.
I'm gonna kill him.
Connors growled through his teeth.
Keys.
Ketterman's voice pierced my ears again.
So many dead. Sykes will be soon. You failed.
Like Connors, Keyes stiffened but held strong. We could hear Sykes' labored breathing from somewhere beyond our lights. The cavern grew narrower towards the rear. For a flicker of a moment, I thought I detected something moving in the shadows.
Larson fixed you. healed you, and you let him die in the dark, cut open like a pig.
It was my turn to tremble. Ketterman's words cut me to the bone. Something about his voice drudged up my worst memories, my guiltiest fears. I wanted to rush at him through the darkness and bash his brains in. A hand slithered under my arm and squeezed my bicep. Connors held my gaze and nodded toward the darkest part of the cavern. I squinted. Someone was there, a tall, gangly figure standing over another kneeling one. Sykes screamed. Connors rushed at him. Keyes and I followed, not even bothering to shout. We came upon a horrific scene. Ketterman stood in front of another skin hut with Sykes' skull clasped in his inhumanly long claws. His fingertips burrowed into her temple, and lines of blood leaked down the sides of her face like melting candle wax. His tallowed flesh looked almost transparent. Rotting organs pressed against the sides of his abdomen, oozing blackened blood as they struggled to function. Sores the size of my hand crusted his face, neck, chest, and torso. Malice burned in his lidless eyes, which were pointed straight at Keyes. His lips peeled back in a cruel smile as he sank his claws deeper into Sykes' skull. Connors lifted his gun, but Keyes stopped him. On the other side of Ketterman lurked more creatures. They tilted their head as they tried to pinpoint where we stood.
Ah, Keyes. The one responsible for my personal hell. Do you know what these things did to me when they took me from the lab?
He slid his long fingers around the neat bullet hole in his forehead. Then he pushed inside it, withdrew a sliver of brain matter pulped with maggots, and ate it. Sykes looked glassy-eyed as she hung from his grasping hand.
They cut me open, packed my innards with the organs of my colleagues.
He trailed a finger down the side of his face.
Then they sprayed me with that infernal gas. I cannot tell you how incredible the pain was. My body felt like it was liquefying in acid, slowly eating away but never dissolving, burning for eternity.
He spat tar-colored bile on the ground. Keyes tilted her head ever so slightly.
It's no more than you deserve. You monster.
Ketterman bared his disgusting teeth.
Very well.
Connors charged at him. One of the creatures leapt on him, sinking its teeth into the nape of his neck and tearing out a bloody chunk of flesh. Connors collapsed. Keyes and I yelled, and Ketterman laughed up to the moment Sykes rammed a sharpened femur into his ragged groin. Hell unleashed itself. Sheaf's words came back at me as two creatures launched themselves my way. Relax. Breathe. Squeeze. Fire. I did so, but I kept squeezing and the bullets exploded out in an incredible rate, ripping through both monsters. They screamed and collapsed on the ground next to a gaping Connors whose neck gurgled blood down his shoulder and face. He still didn't hesitate in taking out his knife and stabbing the creature closest to him over and over again. Keyes was half a moment slower than me getting her weapon up. She dumped half her magazine into the third monster, but got taken out by the fourth. The two of them rolled away with her knife flashing as it dove into the thing's scabby back and its teeth gnashed at her chest and shoulders. Sykes had managed to roll away from Ketterman, whose seething, strangled outline collapsed against the wall, fingers scrambling at the bone shard stabbed into it. I took steps towards him when fire lanced my calf. The creature Connors hadn't stabbed sank its teeth into my leg, opening up flesh and muscle. Roaring in pain, I tried crushing its head with a well-aimed stomp, but it lashed out and knocked me off balance, pulling me to the floor and wrapping its hands around my hips to drag itself toward my neck. I thrashed for all I was worth. The grip these creatures possessed was otherworldly. It crushed my thighs between its arms, and I scrambled for my knife, but found it had gone flying towards Sykes in the melee. The creature dragged itself closer, those claws digging like molten pincers into my ribs. Saliva flecked its jagged teeth, and a wave of nauseating hot breath washed over me. Out of sheer desperation, I made a fist and rammed it down the creature's throat. Decaying flesh engulfed my knuckles and wrist up to the elbow, and the creature choked. Squeezing my eyes closed, I twisted my arm and wrenched upward, ripping the monster's head away from its neck in a gout of blackened blood. Free once more, I rolled to my knees and immediately vomited. Nearby, Keys continued wrestling with her humanoid, though it was now bleeding from multiple mortal wounds. Across from me, Ketterman finally wrenched the bone free and turned towards Sykes, who was crawling toward the knife. He stalked after her, the bone shard gripped in his long claws. He raised it above his head when something slammed into him from the side. Connors had somehow lumbered to his feet and tackled the ex-scientist into the skin hut. The structure collapsed under them, and my best friend started bashing Ketterman's face in with his bare fists.
Screw you! Screw you and this whole goddamn nightmare!
Ketterman didn't stand a chance. His body, weakened from everything it had gone through, collapsed like papier-mâché under Connor's fists. His face caved in, his teeth disintegrated, and his eyes burst when the bleeding man atop him gouged his sockets. Connors tore the doctor's head in two, and he went still. The bloodied man swayed atop the creature before collapsing on his back. Behind me, Connors yelled and drove her knife deep into the point of the final humanoid's chin. A moment later, it was silent. I staggered to my feet and limped over to help Sykes up. She looked battered, but not broken. The same could not be said for Connors. His breath came in ragged, watery gasps. Each one flecked the deep wound in his neck with bubbles of blood. He grinned up at me, and we clasped gore-soaked hands one final time. Sykes knelt beside him and smiled shakily.
Safe?
He whispered. She nodded. Connors smiled, finally content. I watched as his eyes settled on the darkness above, where they became unfocused. He was gone. Kias watched respectfully. She cradled her injured arm and winced when she helped Sykes to her feet. Both of them pulled me up, and the three of us surveyed the carnage. We were alive, wounded to various degrees, but alive. We spent the next hour constructing a litter for Connors to drag his body out of that place. If there was one thing we could do for him, it was that. I almost cried when we dragged ourselves back to the hole. The light shining through it felt almost blinding. It took a long time to get Connors back up to the main center. Our wounds slowed us down considerably. The bite in my leg had bled quite a bit before Keys wrapped it up in a tight bandage. I was worried about potential infection, but that would have to wait. Presently, we made sure to bring everyone out into the cavern where they could be laid to rest side by side. We owed them that much. As we worked, another worry aided us. Would help be coming? Keys checked the radio again, but found it smashed to bits. Most likely Ketterman's work while we were holed up in the lab. She shrugged and looked at Sykes and me.
It's out of our hands now.
So we waited. We treated one another's wounds as best we could. Keys had to cut away a considerable amount of loose flesh from my calf and clean it out. The ligaments in her right shoulder were permanently injured, and we had to set it after discovering it had been dislocated. Sykes experienced trouble with blurry vision in her right eye from where Ketterman had cut her with the claw. She also had nerve damage in her right hand from where the bone shard cut into some tendons. We also displayed plenty of minor cuts and bruises that we fixed up with our dwindling supplies. All in all, we were a sorry bunch of bastards. Bloodied, broken, fear shifting around in our guts like broken glass. But there was nothing left to do now. I ate cans of cold soup, slept on a strained cot, and made small talk with Keys and Sykes when they were in the mood. The bodies of our comrades lay cold under sheets in a neat row near the doors. If rescue did come, we wanted them to be the first ones to enjoy it. Time became shapeless in that cavern. Then one day, or night for all I knew, I awoke to a faint rumbling. I staggered out of my cot, finding Sykes and Keys already on their feet, looking equally confused. We stared at the doors as they began to vibrate and grind inwards. We eyed one another breathlessly. Rust shivered off the cold metal doors, lab equipment trembled around us, and a beautiful ray of winter light spilled over my face. Hey everybody. Alright, so this story I really enjoyed. One thing about this story that I like is that When you get stories like this that tend to be more action themed, they also aren't as scary. But I think this one did a pretty good job of including the action elements, but also being a creepy story. I think that it provided just enough backstory through the exposition of Ketterman for you to understand kind of like why things are happening or how they unfolded this way, but still leaves some stuff vague and ambiguous, but not too much that, at least for me, I didn't feel unsatisfied after it was over. I think it was really fun to do the sound design and music on this one. This one had a lot more kind of like visceral sounds, like burger entries. I don't know if many of you have listened to that story. I did. But with this one, I was able to layer more sounds with those fight scenes and just with other elements of the story, and it was pretty fun to do. I think it came together well. And with the music with this one, I wanted it to reflect the action elements of the story, and then in between those is when I had the more creepy music playing. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the story. I'd love to know what you think in the comments, and let me know what kind of videos you'd like to see in the future. But with that said, I hope you have a good day. The following is a transcription from the audio logs of Dr. Warren T. McCormick. Log number 63748.
Testing. Good. Today's date is August 8th, 1998.
I am attending therapist Dr. Warren T. McCormick. With me is the patient Darren Forrest. The patient has been admitted for 6 days now, with no attempt at speaking or communication of any kind in that time. Patient was found by the Coast Guard in a fishing vessel. No others on board. I will be attempting to diagnose any psychological trauma, as well as any account of what happened aboard the vessel. Darren, can you hear me? Yes. Would you be willing to tell me what happened aboard the ship? Tempest Fate? What happened to her? I'm hoping you can tell me that, Darren. You were found on board the Fate a week ago. None of the other crew have been seen since you left port a month ago. What happened to them? Jesus, they're gone. They're all gone? You couldn't find any of them? I'm afraid not. Do you know where they may have gone? God help them, wherever they went. It was a fate worse than hell. We were out there for about a week when it came up in the net. We figured it was just some accident, had fallen off a ship or something in transit. What is it exactly, Darren? What do you mean? It wasn't still there? Damn thing taunted me for what seemed like an eternity. Just there on the deck, waiting for me. There was nothing there when you were recovered. There was a fucking coffin right in the middle of the main deck. God damn it, how could it have not been there? Can you please start from the beginning? I'm afraid I don't understand what you're trying to say. Fuck. Okay. So, we were out for almost a week, I think. Routine run, just like we had done 1,000 times. It was Friday, maybe Thursday? I don't remember exactly. We pulled up the nets and dumped them onto the deck, the usual. This time, though, there was something big in one of the nets. Heard a big thump when it hit and crushed quite a few perfectly good fish. Hank, our first mate, he went over first to look at it. Turns out it was a damn coffin. We did some looking at it and noticed it was sealed up pretty tight. Captain Kern figured it had fallen off a transport boat or something. Maybe someone that died out of the country or something. Hell, maybe it was an old one from back in the day that got lost. Who the hell knows? Well, upon looking at it, we noticed it was sealed up good and tight. Big bunch of heavy chains wrapped around it and a big old lock holding it all together. Rusted and covered in sea grime. Had a bunch of nonsense carved into the top and sides of the wood. Wasn't any kind of language I'd ever seen. Did you open the coffin? God, no. Not then, at least. Me and Hank, we said we should throw it overboard. Captain Kern and Tommy, though, they said we should keep it and bring it into port. See what they wanted to do with it there. So, of course, the captain overruled us all. We tied the thing off on the deck and left it there all night. The dream started when we went to sleep later. It was surreal, like something out of an old pulp novel. I was on the deck and there was a storm moving in. As it got closer and the wind picked up, the rain started. It wasn't raining like normal though. Fish fell from the sky, rotten, decaying fish. Some of them missing chunks or a head or entire bodies. Then the lightning flashed and there was something huge in the clouds that I could see. What happened to you in this dream? I woke up. There was another flash of lightning and I sat up so fast I about took my head off on the upper bunk. It was still dark out, so I got up and went to grab a drink from the galley. Noticed the door up to the deck was open, so I went to check it out. Captain and Tommy were up there with a pair of bolt cutters trying to open the damn box. I ran up there and asked them what the hell they thought they were doing. Captain just said there were valuables in it. Said he just knew it was something good. Like the coffin was calling out to him to open it or some shit like that. That was about the point the chains snapped from the bolt cutters and Tommy started throwing them all off. He gets all the damn chains off and takes a crowbar to the lid when it still won't open. By then, Hank had heard all the commotion and joined us up top. We were both pretty uneasy, looking at everything going on. This thing was shut tight, so someone obviously didn't want it to be open for a reason. Turns out it was nailed shut. Big iron nails had been run through the outer perimeter of the lid, keeping it shut tight. Hell, I'm surprised any water was able to get in there. Tommy and Captain finally got it off of there, between the two of them each using a crowbar. Was there anything valuable inside? The patient lets out an audible shudder at this point and seems to tense up, drawing in sharp breaths. Nothing of value. No, just a body. Looked as fresh as the day it died. The thing was, the person in the coffin was standing right beside me on the deck. I'm afraid I don't follow. It was Hank. Hank was in the coffin, dead as a fucking doornail, but he was there. Poor guy. Looked in and immediately spewed his dinner all over the deck. It was so real. There's no way it wasn't Hank, you know? Even though he was standing right beside me. So that was it. After we saw that, we put the lid back on the thing and tied it down. Captain put some straps over the top to keep it closed since the nails weren't going back in. But the damage was done. Hank was in the coffin, and we didn't know what to make of what we had seen. I'm afraid that still doesn't explain the disappearance of your crewmates. Because I ain't got there yet. We all headed over to the galley and sat around the table for a bit, just passing a bottle of whiskey around and trying to rationalize what we had seen. None of us had a better explanation than some shared psychosis. God, if that's what it had been, I wouldn't be here right now. The sun rose red that morning. You familiar with sailor superstition, Doc? I'm not, no. Red sunrise means death is on the horizon. Always a bad sign, no matter what. We should have turned tail and taken our asses back to port right then and there, but Captain was determined to stick to schedule. We go that whole day with barely a damn fish coming up. The nets were practically empty and we were way behind our usual haul. As if all the commotion of the night before hadn't shaken us though, this was setting us further back. So we decided to call it early, right around 3 or 4 in the afternoon instead of sunset like we usually do. Everyone meets for an early dinner, then goes off to their separate quarters to sleep. The damn dream started again for me, though. This time it was raining all these damn fish from the sky, and that big thing in the sky seemed even closer. I don't remember much of it, but there was something different in this one. I looked over the deck into the water. All these damn fish were falling from the sky, and out there in the surf were hundreds of bodies, maybe thousands. They were packed in tight, almost blocking any view of the actual water. God, I still remember their faces. All of them. Men, women, children, all facing upward with this look of pure horror on their faces. Mouths open in the loudest scream I couldn't hear over the storm. The thing that shook me, though, was their eyes. They didn't have any. None of them. Eyes were clawed out, and all that was left were the bloody pits where they once were. You could still see it, though. The wide look and the eyelids pinned open in fear. They died in terror, seeing whatever had taken their vision coming straight for them. I woke up because of the screaming. The wind was howling outside, and the rain was lashing the boat from every direction, but that scream pierced through all of it. I scrambled out of bed and up to the deck without missing a beat. Managed to almost break my ankle going up the stairs while I was at it. Hell, I wish I had. Would have kept me from seeing what happened. Captain and Tommy each had one of Hank's arms, dragging him over to the coffin. There was blood all over the deck too, getting scattered by the rain and sea foam washing over it, but it was there, leaving a crimson hue over the whole boat. When they reached the coffin, Tommy held Hank while Captain undid the straps and pushed the lid off. The thing that was inside wasn't Hank anymore. It was like a mass of ocean grime. I could see shells embedded in parts of it, seaweed and urchins clinging in other parts. The worst thing was that it was blinking. All over the body were eyes, all blinking at different times and darting in every direction. Hank was moaning in front of the coffin while the thing rose up out of it like some old vampire movie. Damn thing looked like it slithered out of there, one fluid motion. Suddenly it was standing right in front of Hank and reaching straight for him. Poor bastard. He tried to scream, but Tommy ran a knife straight across his throat before he could make a sound. The thing from the coffin just put out its hands and just took him. 1 second he was there, and the next he was almost absorbed into it. Then Captain and Tommy just stood there looking at it while it kept looking everywhere. And that was it. Fucking hell. They cut out their own eyes next. Both of them. Pulled out some damn oyster knives they must have taken from the kitchen. Oyster knives are dull as hell, meant for just prying the shells open. They took the knives and... They popped their own damn eyes out and gave them to the thing like a fucking offering. Then they just walked straight off the side of the boat into the ocean. I wasn't sticking around there any longer. I ran back to my damn bunk and locked myself in. Had a gun in my footlocker that I pulled out and cradled. God knows if it would do me any good, but if push came to shove, I would rather a bullet than whatever that thing did to Hank. I remember seeing the sun come up through the little porthole in my room. I waited until it was at least noon the next day before I tried to go check. The coffin was still there. The damn thing still out there standing beside it. Just looking in all directions still. I know it saw me. I could feel the eyes follow me as I went back down, as long as it didn't come after me. I stayed in the quarters from then on, only making the occasional run when the sun was at its peak to bring food back with me. I would peek out every once in a while and that thing would still just be standing out there, just staring. Sometimes at night I would hear it whispering, like it was calling to me. Those were the nights I kept the muzzle of the gun pressed to my temple the entire time, telling myself to pull the trigger but pussying out at the last second. It was speaking to me. I couldn't understand the language, but I knew it was sinister. A few times I would look out the porthole of my quarters. It was situated just below the water so I could see fish pass by and the sun filter through the waves. Some nights Tommy and Captain would be out there, looking in at me with their hollow eye sockets, a big smile on their faces. They were waterlogged and decaying already, skin waxing and peeling from their bones. Captain tried to scratch the glass one night and I saw his fingernails break right off. I covered the window after that. Everything after that is a blur. I remember the Coast Guard coming into the boat and shouting for me. I thought it was just that damned thing playing a trick to get me out. I wasn't having it. It wasn't until they busted in the door and wrestled the gun away from me that I finally let go. I don't think I had slept in days. Doc, you said they didn't find the coffin when they got me. And that is correct? God knows what we did setting that damn thing loose. I hope I don't have to see it.
This ends the interview. My professional opinion is that the patient believes the story he is telling. He is highly delusional, still speaking of continued dreams and a coming great flood that he saw in his dreams. I recommend intensive therapy as well as institutionalization until rehabilitated. This is the end of this tape. There's still boxes of these damn things to go through. I'll update when I find anything else good.
I woke up in a birthing sack. Panicked and choking on amniotic fluid, I clawed at the fleshy walls, fighting with all my terrified strength to free myself. With a wet, ripping sound, I was dumped onto the muddy cobblestone of the street below, twisting my ankle as I landed. Cold rain blasted my naked body clean of the sack's liquid. I tried and failed to get to my feet. The street was alien to me, an insane medley of architecture ranging from the modern to the prehistoric. The sky above boiled with storm clouds, illuminating my surroundings with non-stop flashes of lightning. A man walked over to me. His hair was matted with filth and the rain streaked down his mismatched leather clothes. He said nothing, just watched me squirm on the floor. "Please," I gasped, "help me." He answered by slamming a foot down onto my face, breaking my jaw and making my vision reel. He moved onto my limbs, stamping and tugging until he heard the bones snap. Crippled, naked, and screaming, there was nothing I could do to defend myself when he started to eat me alive. My introduction to hell wasn't unusual. Very few people survive their first hour, let alone their first night. When they die, they go through the same thing again, emerging from a new birthing sack in another part of the city. Eventually, they learn to attack the first person they see, and if they're lucky, they'll be able to kill that person. That's the one rule in hell. The strong take from the weak. Get used to the idea, and you might just make it through the afterlife. I'm going to give you a helping hand. Consider this your handbook to hell. A primer on the inferno. Make no mistake, though. I'm not doing this out of the goodness of my heart. When you die, you'll owe me one. Don't worry about trying to find me. I guarantee we'll run into each other eventually. Eternity is a long time. So, it's a matter of when, rather than if. Do as I tell you, and you'll have a better chance than most of avoiding my own nasty introduction to the pit. Welcome to hell. Some people swear they saw a light at the end of the tunnel when they died. To my mind, those people either hallucinated or they're lying. Most of us just wake up in a birthing sack a few minutes after death. The buildings of hell are covered in the things, yellow-brown pimples growing out of the brick. I've already mentioned that the first thing you need to do is claw your way out and get ready to fight. This is where the real bitch of the situation comes into play, since not everybody has the strength to break through their sack's flesh. You get the body you had just before you died, see? So, let's say you were born a cripple, or maybe you died too young or too old. Tough shit. You're going to have a rough eternity drowning in birthing fluid over and over. If you manage to break free of your sack, don't waste time moping around, wondering what happened. Get on your feet and get ready to defend yourself. Chances are good that the first person you see will be hungry. There are no plants or animals in hell, so cannibalism is your only option if you don't fancy starving to death and having to start over. Aim to kill the first person you see. It might take a few tries. Most of hell's residents have been fighting for survival a lot longer than you. They might have armor made from tanned skin, scavenged metal, and bone. They'll almost certainly have a shiv, club, or axe. All of that will be useful to you if you can take it from them. The next thing to do is to find shelter. It never stops raining in hell, and pneumonia is a shitty way to die. Luckily, you'll have a selection of buildings to choose from. Ever wanted to live in a rundown Victorian manor with half a roof and no furniture? How about an ancient Egyptian mud brick hovel? If people have built it, you can find a crumbling version of it in hell. Pick a building, kill any squatters you find, and move in. The best houses are the ones that come with a supply of scrap metal and timber. Not only are these good for making weapons with, they're also vital for getting drinking water. I learned the hard way that Hell's rain is teeming with disease. It has to be boiled before it's safe, so getting a fire going and something to make a bowl with is a necessity. So, we've killed our first man and found a home. Things are going well. Get that far and you're going to want to hang on to what you have forever. You won't. Something will kill you eventually and you'll have to start over. My record is a year. If you want to beat that, you'll need to understand Hell and its denizens. The damned. The people of Hell can be grouped into two categories. The first, the fresh meat, are those who just climbed out of a birthing sack. It's kill or be killed when it comes to fresh meat. Always has been. The newly birthed want clothing and tools and will kill to get a hold of them. The second category, the residents, view fresh meat as a quick and easy supply of food, leather and bone. Residents have an easier time of it for sure, and all of them will fight to retain their resident status for as long as they can. Make no mistake though, residents victimize each other just as much as they prey on fresh meat. If you're a woman, for instance, well, you better get over any hang-ups you have about rape. Women get raped in Hell far more than men, it's just a fact. If you're not one of those bodybuilders or warrior women, do the smart thing and prostitute yourself for protection. Self-respect doesn't keep you breathing. Remember how you get the body you had just before you died? Well, that fact forms the core of Hell's society. The truth of the matter is that throughout history, it's usually been men who die in battle. That means that in Hell, there are a lot of men with young, strong bodies fit for war. Don't like it? Tough. Those are the guys who call the shots. If you can't fight them, you better do as they tell you. If you live long enough and fight well enough, you might get invited into one of the resident tribes. These are groups of people who band together for the sake of safety in numbers. Believe me, being part of a group makes things a lot easier in Hell. However, keep in mind that you're only part of the tribe for as long as you're a resident. Get yourself killed, and it's back to being fresh meat. Tribes offer the closest thing to civilized society you'll find in Hell. If you're part of a tribe, you have people on your side who probably won't kill you unless shit gets rough. Doesn't sound like much, but that's about as good as it gets. My own survival record was thanks to getting into a tribe. Life was good for a while there. We had about 50 soldiers and plenty of girls to fuck. Nobody could touch us, and the men abided by an honor code, so the usual fear of being stabbed in the back by one of your friends wasn't too much of an issue. I could have spent my eternity in reasonable comfort, but Hell has a way of fucking over good things. Human flesh and boiled rainwater doesn't exactly make for a balanced diet, and sooner or later, even the strongest resident dies of malnutrition. I did well to last a year on it, though the last few months were agony. If I believed in God, I'd swear he designed Hell in such a way that nobody stays on top of the food chain for long. The city in the wasteland. Most of the damned live in Dis, the city of Hell. That's where all the fresh meat is born, and considering the size of the place, coupled with the short life expectancy, a lot of people will spend eternity without ever setting foot outside of Dis. Take my advice. Do not leave the city. Things are rough on the streets, that's true, but trust me when I say it gets a lot worse if you try to leave. Dis is surrounded by a wasteland called Gehenna. At first glance, it doesn't look like much, just an empty expanse of gray stretching out into infinity. Sometimes the damned lose that fire in the belly, the will to survive, and set off wandering into Gehenna. Most of them never come back. I made the walk myself once, a long time ago. I don't care how hard you think you are, spend enough time in Hell and it starts to break you down. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm a good person who never deserved this. Nobody can say that and not be a liar. I'm not evil though. Or rather, I wasn't. Not until I got to hell. You murder, rape, and torture because you know they'd do the same to you. You're murdered, raped, and tortured because they know you'll do the same to them. Give it long enough and you just don't want to face it anymore. That's when you take the walk into Gehenna. The first couple of miles I walked were nothing special. The rain stopped after a while, the sludge beneath my feet giving way to gray ash, and I caught my first glimpse of hell's sky beyond the clouds. It was a flat gray with a white sun, completely devoid of beauty or warmth. I trudged on. While walking through Gehenna, I lost any urge to eat, drink, or sleep. My body started to waste away, but I didn't care. Even when my skin started to peel away and my bones were exposed, I didn't care. The further I walked, the hollower I became in mind, body, and soul. I don't know what would have happened if I kept going. Frankly, I don't want to know. Some part of me still wanted to live, so I turned back. I'd walked for days, maybe weeks, yet when I turned around, this was only a few steps away. I stepped back into the city and my body finally fell apart. When I emerged from my birthing sack, I swore never to step foot into Gehenna again. Escaping from hell. There are ways to leave hell. That should be obvious, otherwise I wouldn't be talking to you, would I? Sometimes the living get it into their heads that they want to talk with the dead. They get their crystals, incense, and spirit boards in hopes of reaching their loved ones. Most do nothing more than trick themselves into thinking they've made contact. They smile or cry, convinced their beloved granny is playing the harp on a cloud somewhere before getting on with their lives. A few have the skill to actually reach us, though. They can open a gate between hell and the world of the living that we perceive as a pillar of fire, stretching down from the clouds. As soon as one of those pillars shows up, the damned scramble to be the first to get to it. You haven't seen the true nature of man until you've watched thousands of the damned swarming over each other, kicking, biting, clawing to be the one who escapes. Contacting the dead always results in a bloodbath. Even the most civilized tribes fall apart the instant it becomes clear that only one of them can leave. I've left hell twice now. Left my body behind and ridden that pillar of fire up into the clouds. Some people believe that you can be possessed by demons. Let me tell you something. Demons aren't real. What the living see as demonic possession is just one of the damned testing out their new body. Let's face it, if you fought your way through hell to get back to the world of the living, you're not going to be on your best behavior for long. Sooner or later, we take things too far. Our host dies, or their family caves and recruit an exorcist. Then we're fresh out of the birthing sack and onto the streets again. By now, you should have a good idea of what you can expect from hell. You know to kill the first person you see when you fight your way out of a birthing sack. You know to find clothing, food, and shelter. You know that no matter what you do, how well you do, someday it's back to being fresh meat. Dis is the biggest city you can imagine. Tribes fight and die for territory, and taking a wrong turn is a fucking death sentence. You'll get a feel for where you should and shouldn't go eventually. Develop the kind of street smarts you need to stay a resident for more than a day. Even so, there are places in Dis that you should know about. Let's do a little sightseeing tour of hell. Maybe the advanced warning will do you some good. Skin Street. Allow me to tell you about the first time I saw Skin Street. I dropped out of my birthing sack onto the road, stood straight back up, and got myself ready to fight. Nobody was there. Not a single person was out on the street that stretched for miles in either direction. I relaxed a little and took a look around. Most of the streets in Dis are a labyrinthian network of buildings. You spend most of your stay in hell paranoid that just around the next corner, there's somebody ready to beat you down. Skin Street isn't like that. It's a single straight line with only the rain and the darkness to hamper visibility. I felt more vulnerable there than I felt in any other part of Dis. You ever walked into a wide, empty space and suddenly felt exposed? Yeah, imagine also being naked, unarmed, and in hell. Still, I knew what I was supposed to do. The first step was to find some clothing. That's where I learned how Skin Street got its name. Every building, every busted streetlight and gas lamp was decorated with flayed skin. I'd been in hell long enough by that point to not be freaked out, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't affect me. In a fucked up kind of way, it reminded me of Christmas, you know? People hanging wreaths and lights from their houses, that sort of thing. I remembered the time I'd spent with my family, with my kids on Christmas morning. Feelings like that get you killed. I pushed them back down and pulled some scraps from the nearest building. If somebody was going to leave clothing material lying about, I may as well take it, right? I didn't know it at the time, but every step I took on Skin Street was being watched. When the attack came, I didn't even get a glimpse of the guy. Whoever hit me went for my eyes the second I hit the floor, stuck his fingers right into my sockets. I was blind and crying like a baby when he started to peel away my skin. Here's the thing, some people are fucked up even by hell's standards. The loners, serial killers, stalkers, and psychos all make their way to Skin Street in the end. Most of the damned use the whole body of a kill, but the Skin Street people like to take trophies. They leave their ornaments out as bait for the ignorant, skulking in the shadows and waiting for the best moment to ambush. If you find yourself on Skin Street, you're going to have to think fast. Forget clothing, just grab a rock, a piece of wood, or anything else you can use as a weapon. Stay out of the shadows, keep checking behind you, and get out of there as quickly as you can. Perdition Farms. You're going to be chased in hell, that's unavoidable. At some point, you'll stumble into somebody bigger than you, or you'll find yourself outnumbered. Forget about a fair fight. If somebody can take you down without you fighting back, you bet that's what they'll do. It's easy to lose focus when you're running for your life. You can forget to pay attention to your surroundings. That, my friend, is a big mistake. The outskirts of Perdition Farms are littered with billboards. They promise free food and safety to anybody fucking stupid enough to believe them. The tribes that fight over that particular territory like to herd people off the streets and into the industrial complex they call home. The good news is that those tribes won't kill you. The bad news is that they're big fans of taking people alive. They've got a project, you see. Been working on it for as long as I can remember. I couldn't tell you who originally decided that hell should have organized food production, only that the idea stuck and that over the years, countless tribes have taken it upon themselves to try to make that dream a reality. Get yourself captured by them and you can look forward to a bit of slave labor. For the most part, the Perdition Farms tribes try to make use of the birthing pods as a source of food. They force their slaves to harvest them from the walls, grind them up in industrial vats, mix them with blood, body parts, rainwater, and anything else that could conceivably make a broth. The life of a slave is short, brutal, and disgusting, particularly when those slaves are then used as guinea pigs for the latest concoction. You see, amniotic fluid can be drunk if you're desperate, though drinking too much is guaranteed to make you empty your stomach from every available orifice. The flesh of the sacs is a different matter, though. I couldn't tell you exactly what the birthing sacs are. Some people say they're actual flesh, while others swear they're more like a fungus. What I do know is that they repair themselves over time. Eat some of their flesh, and over the next few days, you'll grow a new birthing sac inside you. It's a small mercy that you won't live long enough to see it break through your skin. You'll be dead shortly after your stomach bursts. If you're lucky, your days as a slave will end when the tribe decides they want some real meat. They're not stupid enough to test their broth themselves, not when there's no shortage of slaves in hell. Look, I can't force you to stay out of Perdition Farms. I can only offer advice. In my opinion, if you think you're being herded there, it's better to take whatever's to hand and cut your own throat. I'd take fresh meat status 100 times before spending another day on the farms. The Boneyard. So, maybe you're thinking to yourself, hey, I'm the kind of nutjob who'd join a cult. Is there anything in hell for me? If that sounds like you, the Boneyard has you covered. You see, there's a certain kind of religious fanatic who really does belong in hell. I'm not talking about the old dears who bake cakes to raise money for the new church roof here. I'm talking about the guys who went to war because God commanded it. who burned women for supposedly consorting with demons, and who saw nothing wrong with fucking the odd kid. When those people get to hell, they're too thick-headed to make sense of what happened. Why face reality when you can just pretend it's all just a test of faith? They find like-minded folk in the boneyard. I'm told that at one time, the boneyard was a cathedral surrounded by a cemetery that stretched from horizon to horizon. Maybe that's true, I don't know. These days, it's a shanty town of temples and churches built from materials scavenged from the streets. Everywhere you look, you'll find wild-eyed zealots preaching their own twisted version of redemption and gangs of masked men on the prowl for fresh converts. Mortification of the flesh is the main pastime in the boneyard. If you listen to the cacophony of sermons, you'll be informed of how the flesh is wicked and must be purged of sin, how lucky we are to be given such a holy duty, how fortunate to be given the opportunity to redeem ourselves before God. The people of the boneyard have had a long time and plenty of fucking practice when it comes to mastering torture and degradation. I'm not a good person. I've killed, raped, and cannibalized, but I can honestly tell you I'd never be able to dream up some of the shit that goes on in the boneyard. I wandered in there by accident once, and I've never been able to get what I saw out of my brain. I watched a woman, naked and bound, forced onto her knees and violated by iron rods. A preacher sewed his own eyes and lips shut in front of a crowd before sawing off his manhood with a piece of slate. A boy, maybe 14, was publicly crucified. A girl was drowned in shit. An older man had sharpened flint pushed under his fingernails. I could list off 100 other atrocities done in the name of redemption. Stay away from the boneyard. The people there decided that hell just isn't hellish enough for their liking. Forget about redemption. Forget about God. The only way out of hell is by riding a pillar of fire and taking over a living body. Focus on that if you want to escape. The damned can't offer you salvation. The damned only offer pain. I have to leave you soon. If I'm going to make the most of life on Earth, I'm afraid I'm going to have to skip town. While I've had plenty to keep myself entertained, this body just isn't suitable for a run-in with the police. It's only a matter of time until some nosy neighbor thinks to pick up the phone. With the humidity over the last few days, my roommate is already pretty ripe. Here's something you have to understand. Hell is a big place. I've given you fair warning about a few of the locations I myself have run into, and that will have to do. Even if I wrote a library's worth of novels solely dedicated to mapping out the distinct locations within DIS, I couldn't tell you everything about the city. What I can do is give you a bit of information about some of the damned. The Slaughter Man. Take a moment to think about all the celebrities you know. How many of them do you reckon would do well in DIS? Not many, I'll wager. Perhaps none. Fame and fortune on Earth doesn't count for shit when you're dead. Very few people are strong enough, mean enough, and downright psychotic enough to earn a reputation in hell. Those few who have what it takes are people you never want to meet. The Slaughter Man is one of Hell's legends. A huge, bearded man with filed teeth, bloodshot eyes, and foam on his lips. Rumor has it that the day he first emerged from a birthing sack, he was unlucky enough to land at the feet of a slaver tribe. Well, those tribesmen chuckled to themselves and readied their clubs and whips, only too happy to take some fresh meat captive. Outnumbered 12 to 1, naked, unarmed, and brand new to hell, most people wouldn't stand a chance. If you believe the stories, the Slaughter Man shrugged off the clubs battering against him and whips cutting into his flesh as though they were insect bites. He picked up the first slaver, put his hands into the man's mouth, and pulled his jaw right off his skull. He moved on to another and then another, tearing them apart with his bare hands until the survivors turned and fled. Nobody knows for sure who he was in life. I've heard theories, though, the most popular one being that he was the berserker of Stamford Bridge, supposedly a single Viking who held up the English army single-handedly. It didn't matter that he could never win, that he was outnumbered, that his enemies had better weapons and armor. He stood on that bridge and fought. By the time he was brought down, he'd killed no less than 40 men. I don't know how true any of this is. I've never seen the Slaughterman for myself, and I don't fucking want to. What I can tell you for sure is that people don't become legendary in hell without good reason. I'd guess that the only one who knows the truth is the Slaughterman himself, and he isn't saying anything. Since the day he arrived in hell, he's only spoken once. The fleeing slavers heard it as the Slaughterman tore their tribe apart. Naked, bloody, and surrounded by corpses, the Slaughterman looked up to the storm-racked sky and bellowed a single word: Valhalla. Hellhounds. How about a little story? I wasn't new to hell. I'd made myself some clothes and a wooden club, found shelter, and had a big slab of meat roasting over a campfire. The only thing I didn't have was a tribe. The area I'd been birthed in seemed slummy even for Dis, all half-collapsed hovels and mud huts. Iron was scarce, barely enough to make myself a water bowl. All in all, not a good spot for a tribe. My plan was simple enough. I'd have a decent meal, carve myself a shiv or two in case I lost my club, then find somewhere more or less dry to sleep. After that, I'd set off to look for a tribe. Even the mildest tribal initiations result in a few scars and a broken nose, so I wanted to be as well rested as I could be. Sleep in hell is both vital and dangerous. There's a knack for finding somewhere that's simultaneously sheltered, hidden, and with access to an escape route. Even then, you never get more than a few hours at a time. In hell, the slightest suspicious noise should scare the shit out of you. A low, throaty growl definitely counts as a suspicious noise. I leapt out of my impromptu nest of skins and wood, raised my club, and returned the growl with one of my own. A woman had crept into my building and was staring at me with dilated pupils. She looked to be in a bad way, skinny, naked, and covered in weeping sores. Her lips peeled back to reveal broken and jagged teeth. It took me all of a second to size her up. She'd been living rough for days or weeks, judging from her protruding ribs and bloating stomach. She was well on her way to dying of starvation, so she was weak, hungry, and didn't even have a weapon. "I've already eaten," I said, relaxing a little and giving my club a few practice swings. "No sense in letting you go to waste, though." I took a step toward her and she bolted, just turned right around and scampered away in a strange animal gait. I took off after her, certain that I could outpace her. Even if there wasn't much meat on her, bones can still be useful. I chased her through a few streets, struggling to keep my footing on the muddy ground. When I finally got close enough to swing my club, she stopped dead. The suddenness of it caught me off guard, and I tripped over her, losing my club as I fell. She howled in triumph, a sound that was echoed by a dozen other throats. That day, I learned two things about the hellhounds. The people who lose their minds and become little more than beasts after enduring centuries in hell. Firstly, they have the necessary animal cunning to hunt as a pack. Secondly, human teeth and fingernails are perfectly capable of ripping flesh from the bone. The surgeons. Modern doctors rarely thrive in hell. Academia and reliance on technology don't leave you in the best state to endure the endless violence and brutality. There are exceptions, though. The people who learn to sew their friends back together amid the machine gun fire of the Somme. Shamans, witch doctors, and holy men who endured famine and warfare. Survivalists who knew how to cauterize their own wounds in the middle of a forest. Those are some of the people who might just be strong enough to ply their trade to the damned. After all, working knowledge of basic medicine is just one of those things that's beyond a lot of the meatheads roaming Dis. Most of Hell's surgeons find a tribe as soon as they're able. Their tools might be crude, but they soon learn to make do. Flint, slate, and shards of glass serve as their scalpels. They make thread from human hair and needles from slivers of iron. Whenever a member of a tribe has an infected sore, a surgeon will be the one to drain the pus. A tribal surgeon could save your life, but they'll do it without anesthetic. Then there are the freelance surgeons, the people who try to go it alone. They make themselves a uniform, the theory being that the damned will recognize them if they all look alike. It doesn't really work, but then you can't expect much logic from people who've lost count of how many times they've died. For one thing, fashions change over time. I'm told that freelancers wore headdresses and bone necklaces at one point. The current trend is to mimic Venetian plague doctors by donning a beaked mask and wearing a long coat of fire-blackened skin. Freelancers are rare. Very rare, in fact. You'll see thousands of damned for every freelance surgeon you come across. When you do come across one, be fucking careful. Firstly, surgeons don't get a free pass in hell. The damned are more likely to attack a freelancer than they are to barter their tools, clothes, or slaves in exchange for his services. You can't be certain if the man in the bird mask and black coat is really a surgeon or somebody who murdered a surgeon and took his clothes. Perhaps they made the outfit themselves in order to draw the weak and the wounded close. Advertising doesn't always work as intended in this. If the freelancer turns out to be genuine, that doesn't give you an excuse to drop your guard. Freelance surgeons aren't usually the most stable people. Put another way, freelancers are usually sadistic fucking psychopaths. Sure, they might stitch you back together and send you on your way. They might also decide it would be more interesting if they stitched you to somebody else. They might think paying an arm and a leg for their services should be taken literally. They might turn out to be some wannabe serial killer who's yet to find their way to Skin Street. For each freelancer trying to do a tough job in a tougher place, there are a dozen or so mangalas who want to try out their toys on somebody too injured to fight back. Stick with your tribe surgeon if you're lucky enough to have one. Failing that, learn to patch up your own wounds. Trust me, if you're able to read, you've already got the intellectual advantage over a lot of Hell's residents. Freelancers aren't worth the risk. Cambions. I'll be honest with you here, I don't know if cambions actually exist. What I'm going to tell you